Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Early July, the fellas are itching to break down some games. Let's take a look at least in my opinion, the most fascinating matchup we are going to see week one, a standalone game in Las Vegas, USC, LSU, and Dill. Two teams that I think are personally getting criminally disrespected heading into 2024. Now, on paper, I kind of understand why the national media talking heads and some casual college football fans might be sleeping on these two teams. You look at these two teams in 2023, brutal defenses for both, and they have to replace two of the best quarterbacks that we saw in the country last year in Jaden Daniels and Caleb Williams. Now, you talk with LSU and USC fans, they've been very vocal in the comments section. Hey, we have a lot of confidence in Danton Lynn and Blake Baker to get these defenses right. But I think more importantly, both of these fan bases and programs have a lot of confidence in the new quarterbacks that we're going to see in 2024. Miller Moss, exceptional performance in the bowl game against Louisville. Garrett Nussmeier, a very good performance against Wisconsin in the bowl game. We like these two quarterbacks. These two teams, I think, are two of the more dangerous teams that we see in the country heading into 2024 that just not enough people are talking about. We're going to find a lot about both these two programs week one. Fired up to get into it. Before we do, and as always, just want to say thank you to you guys. And for the longtime listeners, you guys know these game breakdowns, they are probably the thing we enjoy most, kind of getting into the nitty gritty of these matchups. The amount of support you guys continue to show, it truly does mean a lot. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Much more importantly, whether you agree with the boys, whether you disagree with the boys, whether you're going at it with the opposing fan base, drop your predictions in the comments section. That's the best part about doing these. And Dill, without further ado, let's get into this one. I want to start with this USC offense going up against an LSU defense. And the matchup that I think is the most crucial part of this game for USC is running the football. You look at the LSU defense, and from just purely a personnel standpoint, a lot of the LSU fans that I've talked to have been very vocal. The biggest question mark we have is the inside of the defensive line. You look at USC going into the 2024 season, we think they have an offensive line that can road grade, and we think they have some talented running backs. Now, USC in 2023 didn't run the football very often because he had a quarterback in Caleb Williams. I think with Miller Moss taking it over, having an offensive line that we feel pretty strong can move some bodies off the line of scrimmage, I think USC is going to try to run the football early and often. And if you were to ask me what's the key indicator of who's winning this football game, it starts with who can run the football the best, USC or LSU.
And I think even last year would have been a fair criticism to say that USC was just way too one-dimensional. I mean, yes. I know you got to put the ball in Caleb's hands because he's Caleb Williams. He's one of the best college quarterbacks we've seen in a long time. But I think that allowed teams to tee off on him a little bit. You look at that Notre Dame game, some of those games where the offense struggled. I mean, teams were just getting after him consistently and had really no threat of having to deal with much of a ground game because they just couldn't commit to it. I think you look this year, I think you're right. You look at this USC offensive line, especially that left side, I think is going to be really good if you include Monheim at that center spot. And then you do have really talented running backs. And I think at the end of the day, I actually kind of think this LSU secondary is going to be a lot better than people think because I think they're talented enough. And now with Blake Baker, I think they will turn this over quickly. When you don't have the bodies in the defensive line, and I don't know that LSU has them, there's just not much a coordinator or anyone can do to really stop a team if they really want to commit to smashing.
And I look at USC and say they ran the football well in 2023. They just didn't run the football very often. They were a top 25 rushing offense in the country in terms of yards per carry. I wonder with Caleb Williams moving on to the NFL, if Lincoln Riley goes back to that run game a little bit more, something that going back to last year, we were kind of pounding the table for USC to run the football a little bit more often, a little bit more balance, I think will be massive for this USC offense. And if you were to talk about the second key to the game for USC on offense, it's hitting explosive plays. I look at two different avenues through the passing attack to hit explosive plays. And I think it starts with one, LSU. That was what they struggled with the most in the back end, just giving up explosive plays, letting people get behind them. There's two different ways here. One, you have guys like Deuce Robinson and Jacoby Lane, who I think from a physical trait standpoint, they're two young guys. Not a lot of people are talking about them because they were true freshmen last year, big bodies. that have big-time body control and coordination. They can win those 50-50 balls working vertically. I think that's one thing you attack. I think the second thing, you look at LSU secondary, partially the reason why they were so poor in terms of giving up explosive plays, they failed to tackle. You look at over 1,600 yards after the catch this LSU secondary allowed in 2023. You look at USC, Lincoln Riley is very good at getting his playmakers the football in space. And on top of that, you have, at least in my mind, the most electric college football player in the country in Zachariah Branch, who excels after the catch. Can USC find ways to get Zachariah Branch the football in space and let him operate after the catches? Probably another massive key for this USC offense.
I think that's where it gets interesting, because I think there's an element of me that I think USC, if they want to run the ball, are going to be able to run the ball pretty decently. Again, you go back, I don't really see the talent in the middle to really just consistently shut that down. But I think where it gets interesting is if Blake Baker can kind of do what he did at Mizzou and be able to really control the space of opposing offenses and use his cornerbacks and allow them to challenge guys. Again, I think this is a talented cornerback room. You look at guys like Zy Alexander, Stamps, you've seen good moments from those guys, good athletic, long enough corners to, I think, play really pretty good man coverage and challenge teams. I think if they can eliminate the space for this USC defense, or offense, I should say, for those wide receivers and essentially allow their defense to tee off a little bit more on the run game, add some bodies into the box, and be consistent there, I think that's kind of my avenue to LSU stopping this USC team.
I think you missed the boat there. I think you talked about LSU stopping USC and just didn't talk about, at least in my mind, the key to this LSU defense throughout the 2024 season. That's Harold Perkins. And you look at USC, what's one of the big question marks that we have about USC is that right tackle spot, right? Mason Murphy. I really do like USC's offensive line from those other four. We have some question marks about Mason Murphy. Blake Baker, this guy, he's a wizard in terms of scheming up his players on defense. How many different times can you get Harold Perkins mashed up on Mason Murphy and let him go get after Miller Moss? At least in my mind, you talk about a key for LSU. It starts with you have one of the best defensive players in the country on this defense. You got to use him the right way.
And if they can create those negative plays, I think that's one avenue to essentially stopping USC from just being able to ground and pound. Because, again, if you can knock teams off schedule, if you can get that one sack, one TFL for like 4 yards, it's really, really hard to consistently run the ball. It forces the ball into the air, which is, frankly, I think where LSU wants it. And, again, USC's got weapons, so they're still going to need to stop it. And I think we'll see kind of what happens. I think they have a better shot of stopping the pass than they do the run.
How wild is it that we're talking about? And I truly think it's probably the key to the game. USC playing an SEC team and say, hey, they got to run the football, control the line of scrimmage. Like that just kind of tells you how unique I think this matchup is. Going to the other side of the football, if you pull a lot of LSU fans, I think they feel very similar to the USC fans. We believe in Garrett Nussmeier. Again, very, very impressive performance against Wisconsin in the bowl game. He's going to have plenty of talent to work around him. But I think, again, just like we talked about with USC on the offensive side of the football, I think the same story is for this LSU offense. You look at USC, where are they weakest? We kind of feel good about the moves they made in the secondary, but on the inside of the defensive line, not only the talent, but I think more importantly, the depth of the inside of the USC's defensive line is probably the biggest question mark that we have. You look at LSU and say they got, at least in my mind, the best offensive line in the country and a running back in Caleb Jackson who can absolutely pound the rock. And so if you're LSU, very similar storyline. Can you establish the run, keep USC's offense off the field? At least in my mind, the key to the game, both of these teams rushing attacks.
I know. It's so weird that it just essentially mirrors each other on both sides. Whoever can run the ball, it's going to be really hard to deal with. And I think you're right, though. When you just look at LSU, I think they're going to be much more comfortable just doing it because I think Brian Kelly knows that his strength of this team is this LSU offensive line. I have no doubt he's going to commit to it and pound it on him. And again, you kind of talk, well, LSU's passing attack should be really dangerous. I think that's what people think when they think LSU. But I also think like USC's secondary was bad last year. I don't think it even resembles what it was. They brought in a lot of new players. And again, similar conversation what Blake Baker should be able to do with LSU secondary. I think Dan Lynn shown his ability to turn a secondary around really quickly and do a good job creating turnovers, forcing bad mistakes from quarterbacks, and making a secondary that's, again, didn't play great in 2022 to playing really good in 2023. He did that at UCLA. I think he can do that at USC. I think the one key is, again, similar to LSU, they don't have the bodies right now. It doesn't feel like in the middle to deal with a really good offense.
Yeah, and you look at the key for USC, at least in my mind, on the defensive side of football, and quite frankly, the key for USC all year is, can you trust your cornerbacks to hold up a kind of on islands, if you will, and roll some of your safeties in the box? They're certainly going to need to do that to stop this LSU rushing attack.
And they're really good. Their secondary corner safeties are really good players.
But on the flip side, you have an LSU wide receiver room that a lot of people are going to be sleeping on because Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas go to the NFL draft. I mean, I know a lot of LSU fans that are fired up about guys like Lacey and Hilton Jr. and what Aaron Anderson can do in space, and CJ Daniels. LSU's got some real talent at wide receiver. One of the other keys to this game is who wins on the outside, because USC is going to be rolling bodies into the box. Guys like John Humphrey, DeCarlos Nicholson, they're going to be asked to hold up odd islands and man coverage against some really good wide receivers. Can LSU capitalize on that? Probably another key for LSU on offense. And Dill, before we get into the picks, just talk about some X factors here. I think the biggest X factor is red zone. You look at both of these teams, we're pretty confident that both of these teams are going to be able to move the football. Field goals aren't going to win you this football game. You got to score touchdowns when you get inside the 20. So you start looking at some really important metrics in terms of who's going to be winning this football game. You look up at the end of the game, you don't even need to show me the score. Just show me how these teams operated in the red zone, and I'll give you the winner. These teams need to score touchdowns in the red zone. Field goals aren't going to win it. Red zone's massive deal. With all that being said,
that'll probably be really important because I don't know that these two teams are going to score the same way they scored last year. I mean, they were scoring the opposing 40s. They were creating a ton of big plays. Again, I think both these secondary coaches or coaching staffs should be far better. I don't think they're going to give up a ton of easy stuff like both teams were doing last year. So again, you pound the ball a little bit on the ground, get yourself into the red zone. You're right. I don't think either team had to do a ton in the red zone because they were so explosive last year. I think the red zone gets really, really important, and you figure that out really, really quickly when you need to rely on running the ball.
100%. So with all that being said, keys to the game for both of these programs, I'll put you on the hot seat first. Who are you taking? USC, LSU. Line sitting at LSU 6.5-point favorites. Who you got?
Yeah, I still like it. And you keep calling this game a toss-up. I kind of think this line, I think they should be over a touchdown, frankly. I just think LSU right now, I have more confidence that they've kind of built, like, again, their ability to run the ball, their offensive line, their offensive skill. It's so good. I have such questions about what USC is going to be able to do in that interior, the defensive line. And then I look at LSU. I think there is a bit more individual playmaker or playmaking ability with Harold Perkins and his ability to impact that game and knock a couple drives off. I think that favors LSU because I just don't know that USC has that guy, if you will.
I'm going to go off the
But they might because they have good young players like Braylon Shelby. I mean, there's some young guys who might really surprise me.
I'm going to probably have the most surprising pick. That this is going to have a lot of people scratching their heads. But I truly, this is kind of how I see the game going. They'll give me the under. I think you're going to see a lot of people get in front of a TV screen or on camera and talk about how this game is going to be a track meet and there's going to be a lot of points on the board. Yeah, I think both teams move the football, but I think both teams move the football a little bit more methodically than explosively like we saw last year. And so that over-under sitting at 62.5, I think both teams are going to try to run the football a lot. That clock is going to run, and I have a lot of confidence in both Blake Baker and Dan Lynn to turn around these defenses a lot quicker than a lot of people say.
And so at least make them respectable, right? Like, so they're not just having busted covers and like giving up.
Yeah, both these defenses were a disaster from a coaching standpoint. I mean, it was easy to score on these defenses because it was just blown coverages left and right, missed tackles. I don't think you're going to see that in this matchup. So you asked me 12 months ago if these two teams are squaring off. You have Caleb Williams and Jaden Daniels versus two really bad defenses. The over-under might be at 80 points. I think teams are going to move the football. Both of these teams are going to move the football. Points are going to be put up on the board. it's going to be a little bit more slow. I think both teams are going to try to run the football, control the line of scrimmage, control the time of possession. For that reason, they'll give me the under. Now, on a side standpoint, I probably do lean LSU, but I really do think it's a toss-up in terms of how there's a lot of unknowns. I mean, two new defensive coaching staffs and new quarterbacks. I'd rather just bet on this game kind of playing out the way I think it's going to play. So that's where I'm going. Would love to hear from you guys in the comment section. Again, appreciate y'all rocking with it. If you guys do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Appreciate you guys. We'll talk to y'all later.